The Ripsaw Chakram became one of my favorite weapons in all of gaming. You fire 2 to 4 buzzsaws out into an enemy of your choosing, and it deals damage continuously. Already that's pretty cool. You can run around the arena and know you're doing damage to an enemy. But the cherry on top is the tormented retract function. Half pulling the left trigger is how you call the discs back to you, but if you hold down the half pull on the trigger, it revs up the buzzsaws, dealing a crazy amount of damage in the process until you let go, which will then see them returning to you once more. This was how I defeated the final boss, a couple of times, and is how I cleared out so many difficult rooms with hard enemies and boss variants. It shreds their health bars. The flow state of moving from one enemy to the next, launching the discs into one threat, revving them up, all the while dodging enemy attacks and planning when I can retract the blades back to me and move on to the next threat, was intoxicating. I've been playing Earth Defense Force 6 off and on, practically every day, and each time I would go back after having a Saros session, I'd actually end up missing the feeling of playing Saros. Dashing and jumping around, firing these chakrams, dispatching enemy shields, launching my prominence when the time calls for it. While I was perfectly satisfied to stop playing Returnal after seeing the epilogue, as I'm writing this, I do sort of want to go back and play more Saros. Part of it, of course, comes down to the controller. The PS5 DualSense is a work of art. The haptic feedback vibration, being able to simulate a surprising number of unique vibration patterns, from the pitter-patter of rain all the way to the intense explosions of combat. The adaptive triggers themselves, which I brushed off when playing Dying Light 2 all those years ago, since the idea of the trigger is harder to press is a gimmick that gets old fast. But when it has a clear purpose, and the developers actually take advantage of it with their inputs, it feels fantastic, and adds to the number of inputs you're able to jam onto a single controller. Simply put, I don't think I'd have felt as immersed or even entertained if I played Saros on any other controller. It's mesmerizing. You could say the same thing about the game's visuals. If the PS5 generation has a trend with its visual style, particle effects are definitely it, and while those are as pretty as one could hope for a AAA PS5 title, there's something to be said about how few PS5 games truly feel next-gen. As far as I'm concerned, Bluepoint with the Demon's Souls remake and Housemarque with Returnal were some of the only games that felt like they weren't holding back, truly made for the new hardware, and Saros is similar. After a while, you sort of get used to looking at gorgeous games, but since I was intermixing this with editing the Tenchu 3 video, it was trivial to become enamored by all of it. When I was stubbornly refusing to give Returnal the time it deserved back in 2021, I was lamenting the fact that Housemarque, the makers of my beloved Nex Machina, had sort of lost their way by chasing the big-budget Sony money. I didn't blame them. They said after Nex Machina bombed that they'd need to pivot away from arcade-style games to support themselves, but it still made me sad to see such a great studio change course to something so divorced from their origins. Except I was completely wrong. Returnal practically plays like Nex Machina, but a behind-the-shoulder camera version. The fast-paced but fair arcade shoot-'em-up DNA still largely present, and with Saros, as much as the colors and particle effects and visual bedlam can look confusing at a glance, it's quite easy to parse once you get used to it. It's not just a fireworks show for the sake of it, it's readable and delivers information. My one quibble is that, quite often, it felt like I shouldn't be getting hit by a yellow orb or a blue orb, but I did. Many times on the final boss it kept happening, and I had to work around it. It could easily be my fault, but that's really the only time the camera positioning and hectic visuals ever became deceiving. In all other areas it's clear and engaging, and arguably more interesting is how it connects with the themes and story. Being a Housemarque fanatic, the first thing I thought of when seeing the eye candy of danger, the constant light show of blue and red, wasn't, oh wow, this game looks pretty. It was instead, oh my god, Housemarque really did it, didn't they? They dove into their Outland bag. Outland was a game made by Housemarque that released back in 2014, an action-y platformer where you had to match the color of your character to not take damage by the colored balls. There's much more to it than that, of course, but it made me smile seeing such a clear nod to one of their past games. There's so many hazards that feel almost like spectacle art pieces rather than difficult obstacles, something to gawk at opposed to think about how you'll traverse. And what other reason would there be to include so many red and blue colored deadly traps? Well, potentially because Arjun is running from what he did, and what he did involves the police chasing after him for the crime of This is where we'll get into heavy spoiler territory, so be warned.